Hi, this is Eric. It's Sunday evening. It's actually about 10:30 my time in Thailand. But I've been thinking about the latest news. Of course, it's always on my mind. And the latest news that they've been reporting breathlessly is that Tulsi Gabbard, who is the director of national intelligence, just told us that Barack Obama was actually behind the RussiaGate hoax, and that he was blaming Russia for the whole problem of Trump getting elected president, and it was all Russia's fault, but it was really Obama that made it all up. And what a surprise! She's such a great researcher. She discovered this, and it's ridiculous. Come off it, Tulsi. Let's back up a little bit, okay? In 2016, I was following the election, and Tulsi Gabbard was this fresh face that had appeared in the Democratic space. And she had called out Hillary Clinton, and she'd called out the Democrats. And Tulsi was this. She was presenting herself as a conscientious veteran of Iraq who had fought valiantly for her country, and she's a real war hero. It's just really wonderful what she's done protecting our country from the evil people overseas that we invaded on the basis of lies, and yet she's pretending to be some kind of war hero. It's really, this is, I call this political opportunism. But you could say, well, let's forgive her for that because by presenting herself as a heroic military hero, that gives her license to challenge the system. Okay, so that's the idea. So she is running for president, and Bernie Sanders was running for president in 2016. And at the time, it didn't look really good because they were, challenging the Democratic National Committee, and Obama, of course, was the head of the party. He had just finished. He was elected president in 2008, and he was finishing 2 terms. So now we're talking about 2016, and Hillary is probably going to be the front runner. And but then there's this upstart Donald Trump, and so this is the background of it. And at the time, and I was just trying to I was doing some research because I wrote an article back then talking about the fact that the Democratic Party is a loser party. It's a waste of people's time to ever think that anything good is going to come out of that Democratic Party, because they call it two wings of the same warplane, basically. The Democrats and the Republicans, they both support the wars in one way or the other. Although the Republicans, you've got, it's on the one hand you've got the libertarian Republicans who say that we're against the war, and but most of the Republicans are for wars, and then you got the Democratic Party where most of the Democrats are for wars, but then you've got a few people who are anti-war, people like Dennis Kucinich who get squashed, or Jesse Jackson who got squashed, or Henry Wallace, he got squashed. Who else was there? Well, you get the point. And Bernie Sanders, of course, and he was for the people, and he was a socialist. They say, he's the most tepid of possible socialists you can imagine. But he was, he attracted a lot of attention. And Tulsi was talking about, stopping these forever wars. So that was a good thing. And I thought, instead of you guys, fighting from inside the Democratic Party, what you really should do is start your own party, work together, because this was in early 2016. There was several months before the Democratic National Convention, and quite a few months before the November 2016 election. You could have put together a party, got a lot of people behind you, and actually, created a third political party that would have had some force. But you didn't. But Tulsi, you didn't do that, and Bernie Sanders, you didn't do that. And in the end, you basically threw in the towel. What was worse, I think it was in 2000, I think it was 2020, Tulsi was running again, and she famously did in Kamala Harris, with good reason. Kamala Harris was she's another political opportunist. They're all political opportunists, and they have no interest in helping the people. They run on promises, and they stab their own voters in the back, or spit in their faces, whatever you want to say. So anyway, so Tulsi Gabbard, actually I voted for her in the Democratic primary in 2020, and I've donated to her campaign. But what happened was that the election in 2020, Bernie Sanders was running. He was probably going to win, and the Democratic National Committee had a whole bunch of candidates running. Amy Klobuchar and Pete Buttigieg and Kamala Harris. There's a whole bunch of them running. And at a certain point, the Democratic National Committee basically called these guys up and said, shut up, drop out, because we're going to all unite behind Joe Biden, that paragon of statesmanship, who even then there were cognitive questions about his cognitive abilities. So I thought that, if Tulsi had any principles, she would have dropped out. She would have said, I'm sorry. Joe Biden has a record of more warmongering. He was behind the Iraq war. He sent me, Tulsi Gabbard, off to fight in that war based on lies. No, I am not going to support that candidate. But she didn't do that. She threw in the towel, and she endorsed Joe Biden. Now, during that campaign, I actually made donations to two parties. One was the Green Party, and the candidate there was this guy Howie Hawken. And Howie Hawken, kind of talked with a bit of a Southern drawl, and he was kind of folksy, and you thought he's a pretty good guy. But he bought in hook, line, and sinker to the whole Russiagate bullshit. And finally, when I just had enough of that, and I wrote a letter to his campaign, I said, I sent you money, and I do not support this narrative that you're promoting here, and I want my money back. And they said, gee, we're really sorry that you did that, but okay, we'll send your money back. And they actually did refund my money. In the case of Tulsi Gabbard, I was in contact with her campaign. What happened there was that she had on her website, she was talking about the fact that, Russia was this evil force that was causing trouble for Ukraine, and that Petro Poroshenko, who was the president at the time, I'm pretty sure, I think this is what was happening. Anyway, she was endorsing sending money to the Nazi government in Ukraine. And I'm thinking, you are on the Armed Services Committee, and you're on I think she's on the Foreign Relations Committee. What is going on with you? You are in Congress. Don't you have access to information? Don't you know what's going on? Why is it that little old me, has been following these things? I know who to listen to, who tells the truth, who doesn't tell the truth, and I knew that it was Obama in 2014, along with Joe Biden, who overthrew the democratically elected government of Ukraine and installed using neo-Nazi the grandchildren of the collaborators of the Nazis in World War II, who committed massive atrocities. And then after the coup, they staged a massive atrocity in Odessa in May 2nd, 2014, which touched off a rebellion in eastern Ukraine. And then the coup government was bombing those people in Donetsk and Lugansk. And that was the start of a civil war that went on for 8 years and finally culminated in Russia finally putting its foot down and saying, we are not going to tolerate you guys uh, um, dropping bombs and waging war on your own people. And that's when Russia finally went in 2022. But even in 2020, this had been going on since for 6 years already, and Tulsi Gabbard didn't know what was going on. Um, what is with the political class in Washington D.C. that these people who are in the corridors of power don't even know what the hell their own government is doing, and they support it? I mean, it boggles my mind. So here we have Tulsi Gabbard coming out with this new breathless report that Obama was actually fomenting a false narrative that Russia was the one who was meddling in American affairs in the United States elections. And I was following this from the very beginning, and we all knew the Democratic National Committee was through their emails, their own internal emails that were leaked to WikiLeaks, that they were undermining Bernie Sanders, and Hillary Clinton was neck deep in all this stuff, and Obama had to be neck deep in it as well because he was basically the leader of the party, and the election is stolen from Bernie Sanders. We knew all that in 2016 and 2020. And here's Tulsi Gabbard breathlessly reporting. What is the motivation for this? It's very fishy. So this is not going to be a long report, but I felt like you have some of these more recent commentators who are reporting on this stuff breathlessly and saying, like Dan Davis said, I've got this new report. Dan Davis is a good guy. He's a military person, and he's an honest person. But even he, doesn't. He's not fully aware of the depravity of the military-industrial complex and the depravity of the American political class. He kind of gets it, but he doesn't quite get it. But in any case, here's Hillary Clinton, and she comes up with a story, and it's like, what a surprise! It's not a surprise, some guy named Seth Rich, ends up dead on a city street in the middle of the night with his laptop, and the laptop is taken, and it's not, and the contents aren't released, and the murder is never solved, and he was a disgruntled Democratic National Committee campaign worker who knew what was going on, and he was the one who almost certainly used a thumb drive to pass on the emails to WikiLeaks. And it was Bill Binney, who was the forensic investigator who had previously worked for the National Security Agency. He was also a brilliant guy, an IT guy, and a whistleblower, because in the American government, you do have conscientious people who are willing to speak up, and they pay a heavy price. Their careers are often crushed because they simply don't want to play along with the lies. So here we have this accusation that Russia hacked the computer, and Bill Binney said no. We can tell by the speed with which the emails were downloaded that it was done through a device attached to the computer. It was not done through a computer hack. Computer hacks take longer to download than something that is downloaded to a thumb drive. So and we knew all that back then. Ray McGovern and Bill Binney talked about it. Both of these people are intelligent professionals. So again, what is the motivation behind this kind of breathless reporting of the fact that the whole RussiaGate scandal was based on lies. And the Democratic Party simply was not willing to face up to the fact that they had stabbed the American people in the back too many times, and as a result, and they took the candidate that could have won their election. You know, if the Democrats really wanted to win the election as a party, they could have allowed Bernie Sanders to take the nomination. He definitely would have won it because he was attracting huge crowds. And you know, if they were really, really sincere about being insincere, they could have allowed him to become the president, and then they could have stabbed him in the back. You know, like kind of like with Jeremy Corbyn. You know, Jeremy Corbyn was he was the head of the Labour Party, and they let him become the head of the Labour Party, and then they stabbed him in the back. But they could have done that to Bernie. They could have allowed Bernie Sanders at least to get a prominent position in the party. I mean, a real position where we would have some actual say. But you know, they didn't even want to get him. They wouldn't let him near the presidency. So so what do? They cook up these stories about the Internet Research Agency, which is some trolling organization. It's a Russian Facebook ads agency in St. Petersburg, and they purchased a bunch of ads. They purchased like $100,000 worth of ads, 50% of which showed up after the election. But they accused Russia of using of buying a huge amount, $100,000 of Facebook ads that would have thrown the elections, because the Russians and their evil intelligence were able to manipulate the public. And of course, now Tulsi Gabbard says, well, actually, we knew that there was no way that the Russians were going to be able to influence the election in any way. We're talking about the Democratic Party has got billions of dollars, you know, and the Republican Party billions of dollars invested in these elections, and they're worried about, you know, stupid $100,000 in Facebook ads. And another case they had was I think it was one of the high officers. I think it was like the chief technical officer, something like that, for Google, and they get him in front of Congress, and they say, well, you're the head of Google, and you must know how much money the Russians spent on ads to throw the election in favor of Trump. How much money did they spend? And the guy from Google says, well, it looks like they spent about $5,000. So that, if you're listening to this, do you remember that testimony? I saw the testimony. Do you remember that testimony? Do you remember the fact that when the federal government sued the Internet Research Agency and demanded that they come to court and answer for their crimes, the Russians had the audacity to send lawyers to the court hearing, and the lawyers said, "Show us the effing evidence." And the U.S. government says, well, on the basis of national security, we're not able to show the evidence. And the judge says, get the hell out of here. You know, if you don't have evidence, don't come here and give us this crap about, the Facebook ads. You don't have a case. So at least the American system at least worked to that extent, that you had these two cases where a judge is actually willing to ask a real question. Where's the evidence? And somebody in Congress asks somebody in Google, how much money did the Russians actually spend on ads? And how even relevant were these ads? They just cook all this stuff up. And then here we are, 2025, 9 years later, and Tulsi Gabbard, as the director of national intelligence, says, oh, wow, we've just uncovered this massive evidence that the Russians really didn't do it. So, what is the motive behind all this? It's a real question, because, the the whole Ukraine project here, which Obama cooked up with his lieutenant, Joe Biden, who was the vice president at that time. Joe Biden gave the attaboy as Victoria Nuland, who was the chief operative who put that coup together in 2014. She said, oh, well, before she was talking with this is a leaked phone call. The Russians probably did hack that phone call. We don't know exactly who, but somehow this phone call that nobody denies happened, appears on the internet. And Victoria Nuland is saying, yeah, we've got this coup all lined up, and we know who we're going to create to be the president. The U.S. government, in its wisdom, decides who's going to be the president of another country. This never happens, does it? Oh, starting with Mossadegh in 1953, or Arbenz in Guatemala, and Pinochet in Chile, and dozens of other countries that we've interfered in. Oh, and by the way, speaking of meddling in elections, in what was it, in 1993, I think it was, or 1996, the United States, the cover of Time magazine has a picture of Boris Yeltsin and how America saved Russia from the evil opponents of Boris Yeltsin, the evil Russians who are going to save their economy from being plundered by Wall Street, is what the story was really about. And they say, they're complaining about Russia. The possibility Russia spent $100,000 on Facebook ads, but it was really $50,000 and $5,000 on Google ads. But this is a terrible crime. But fortunately, Tulsi Gabbard says, well, actually, they weren't guilty of it. So the question is, why are they doing this? And this is a complete speculation here, but I think that the reality is that Obama thought, see, the way the empire operates, they're not really, how do I say it? They don't play things for keeps in a certain way. They thought they could go in, overthrow the government in Ukraine, arm it to the teeth, pick a fight with Russia, use a bunch of sanctions to bring down the Russian economy, bring in a bunch of NGOs to stir up trouble inside Russia, get rid of that recalcitrant Putin who just doesn't know his place. And they thought that they would take over the Russians, for cheap. But it turns out that Russia was a little bit more of a tough customer than they thought. And now that they've really got themselves into a mess, they have to figure out a way to get out of it. So we're seeing a couple of things. One is Tulsi Gabbard saying, well, actually, Russia really is not the same, evil entity that we have been portraying it as. And so maybe we shouldn't pick a fight with a nuclear superpower, which could actually wipe us off the map faster than we could say Paul Revere, because the Russians have weaponry that is far superior to us. And why? Because their educational system is far superior to the United States. So they produce better scientists who are able to make better weapons. And also their military-industrial complex is designed to actually create weapons that work, not weapons that make a profit. A good friend of mine told me that he used to work for, Lockheed Martin. And he quit in disgust because his superiors said, we're not in this business to make good weapons. We're in a business to get as much money out of the federal government as we can. This is why we have a $1 trillion defense budget. It's just a whole big scam. And then we wonder why we can't even defeat Afghanistan. And we're having trouble getting control of Iraq. And we thought they were going to beat the crap out of Iran. And Iran, is giving us a lot more trouble than we expected. So that's what I mean. This is bully foreign policy, where we act like Mr. Tough Guy. We talk a big game, But when we meet an opponent that actually can kick the crap out of us, then we kind of have to figure out how we're going to get out of this without looking really stupid. So I think that may be part of the reason why Tulsi Gabbard came up with this thing that maybe we better back off of our accusations against Russia. So that's one possibility. So that's all. I'm just ranting here, but I just think it's really strange that after all this time, after 9 years, where anybody who's watches these things as I do, and there are other people watch these things, and all you have to do is you just have to have your eyes open. The DNC steals the elections, and then they have to blame somebody, so they say, oh, let's blame the Russians. Well, it's not working, so they have to figure out a way to cover. And the thing about people like Tulsi Gabbard is that she, presents herself as being anti-war and being a cool person and on the side of truth, justice, and the American way, but she's just an opportunist, just like the rest of them. I mean, you look what happened recently, where I forget exactly what the circumstances was, where she was supposed to corroborate some issue, and she basically rolled over and said, yeah, she followed the party line. I forget exactly what the issue was, but she followed the party line. So there's something, the way things are operating in Washington, there's something that goes on, and apparently the winds have shifted to the extent that she's now been told that we better, cool our heels in terms of confronting Russia and being a little less, what can I say, a little bit less confrontational. So that's all I have to say, and thanks again for listening. I'll leave some some links below where you can support my work, and unfortunately I was not able to find the article where I looked for it. I wrote an article talking about Bernie Sanders and Tulsi Gabbard. This was in 2016. Stop pretending that the Democratic Party works for you. It does not. Start your own party. And they didn't do that, and now who do we have starting a new party? Another billionaire, Elon Musk, as if Elon Musk and the billionaires are the ones who are going to bail out the country. And they've got all these people who idolize these guys. And, what we need a people's movement to get back control of the government. We have the U.S. Revolution was fought by the working class, but the Constitution was written by the upper class, and they've had control ever since. It's been a constant, civil war back and forth between two classes, and until the people, stage a real, I guess you could say, create a real opposition to the people who actually, as George Carlin called it, the real owners, until we get back control from these people who've been running the country since they wrote the Constitution, we're just going to be, spinning our wheels. So that's all I have to say, and I'll catch you next time.